Good evening, I'm Errol Laborde. Marcia Cavanaugh is off tonight. Two local teams. One had a disappointing year, the other finished with a big win. We're referring, of course, to the 2014 New Orleans Saints and Andrew Jackson's 1814 American Army, which, unlike the Saints, went on to take the field in January. We'll be talking about wins and losses tonight. We'll also look at what to expect in the new year in both business and politics. Marching with us are tonight's informed sources. Ron Chapman, author of the book, The Battle of New Orleans, But for a Piece of Wood. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist. And Jeff Duncan, sports columnist for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And Jeff, a little bit later in the show, we're going to be talking about the Saints. But quickly, last night's Sugar Bowl, the first under the new format. How are people feeling about the format, and do you think it's good for the Sugar Bowl?
Well, by all indications, it was a rousing success. I mean, the ratings, overnight ratings were sky high, almost equal to a national championship game. Attendance was around 75,000, great attendance. If anybody was out in the French Quarter this weekend, I think they saw the Ohio State fans came down in droves. And I think on the field, we had one of the more exciting games we've ever had.
It was a great game.
An incredible game. I think it ended about midnight. It was very late in the Superdome, but exciting on the field. And I think we're seeing that this playoff is going to be incredibly popular in college football. We only have 4 teams in the playoff right now. This was a semifinal game. So next week, Oregon and Ohio State will play for everything in Dallas. But I expect this thing to grow eventually. We've talked about it on the program before, potentially going to 8 teams. You could certainly make a case that some of the other teams that were left out of this 4-team playoff right now probably could have maybe won a game, maybe beaten one of the teams that lost. So I expect there to be some momentum, maybe not in the next 2 or 3 years. I think this is going to be the format for a while, but down the road.
For next year, will the Sugar Bowl have to bid again to host a semifinal game?
No, it's locked in. Next year, the Sugar Bowl will just be a matchup and a normal Sugar Bowl-like matchup, although it will have different affiliations. They'll have a Southeastern Conference representative against a Big 12 conference representative. So it's locked in. That's under contract. They will not be in the rotation. There's going to be a rotation on these semifinal games, and they are out of the rotation next year and will be back in after that.
But how about to host a championship game? Is that a separate bid? Or?
Totally separate bid, much like a Super Bowl, and we've talked about it before. New Orleans has lost out on these bids recently. We are not winning these big sporting event competitions. We lost the Super Bowl. We lost the Final Four. We've lost out on this national championship game. It's something that I think state leaders need to get together on and decide a new strategy, because just the fact that we can roll out the ball and say, hey, we've got the best city in America to have these events in isn't working anymore. It takes a lot of dollars.
Well, Jeremy, we have politics and football in our first segment here, so let's go to the football part, the debate, which is the more popular spectator sport. I wanted you to talk about this year, which is going to be a big year in politics, but within the last week, another issue has popped up that I guess we should address, and that is the situation with Steve Scalise and the criticism of a group he spoke to several years ago. Is he going to survive this?
Right. Our top story so far for 2015 in politics is one that started in 2014, just a few days ago. Yeah. This is Steve Scalise. Is that we know that he accepted an invitation to speak from a close ally of David Duke. We don't know if he actually spoke to the group. There's some conflicting reports about that. There's one source saying that he spoke to a neighborhood association in the same meeting room as a white supremacist group. And there's another source saying he actually spoke to the group. Either way, Steve Scalise said he didn't know. Had he known, he wouldn't have spoke to them. He said it was a mistake. And look, I think as long as we know everything there is to know about this story, Steve Scalise will survive this. He has national, state, and local elected officials rallying around him, including Democrats like Cedric Richmond and Ed Murray. These are two well-respected members of the legislature. Cedric Richmond, a former legislator, now a congressman, and I think they would call it like they see it. I think many people believe that. But the leadership is behind him as well. The Speaker of the House has issued a statement saying he's going to stand by Steve Scalise. So, it's definitely a rocky start to 2015 for Steve Scalise, but again, unless there's a few more twists and turns to the story, I think they've kind of gotten over the hump, and the media is going to move on to something else in a matter of days.
And isn't there the basic constitutional argument of freedom of speech?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's You know, the fact, though, that it happened in Louisiana, I think gave it a little extra push to the story, because Louisiana is a place that has these political ghosts that come back to haunt and fright. You know, we thought we were done with Edwards when he went to prison, but yet here he is, a wife, a book, and a reality show later running for Congress. He gained some notoriety. You know, at the state capitol, when documents go missing, staffers still like to blame the kingfish, you know, the man who was shot in the building, get married on the grounds. And David Duke is like that, too. You know, maybe out of all those political ghosts, he has the most oomph to come back and really frighten and remind us of that awkward dance Republicans faced back in '91 when he ran against Edwin Edwards. So I think that played a big role in it.
Now, the year ahead, it's going to be a huge year because it's a statewide gubernatorial election. The incumbent is not eligible to run again, so we're going to be electing a new governor and probably at least some new statewide officers, new legislators. What did we learn from the past year going into this year politically?
Yeah, it's going to be a noisy, rambunctious political year. Before we can get to that, the hump we have to get over is the regular session of the legislature. There's a $1.4 billion budget hole that's likely to grow over the next couple of weeks due to oil prices. Common Core is going to be back on the menu, and higher education officials probably face one of their most treacherous sessions in recent memory because they're going to be more susceptible to cuts than ever before. But once we get past that, the election season begins. It really has started in earnest already. There's a governor's race atop the ballot, and it's David Vitter, Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden, Public Service Commissioner Scott Angel, and the lone Democrat so far, State Representative John Bell Edwards. The wild card, the really interesting wild card now is Burl Cain, the warden of Angola, who's going to be speaking to the Baton Rouge Press Club on Monday. But there'll be an active lieutenant governor's race, an active attorney general's race. And I think what we learned from this past year is that the financing landscape for elections in Louisiana have changed. So we've seen the introduction of the super PAC, which these are groups that can raise unlimited amounts of money and spend it too, but they can't coordinate with the candidates they're backing. And we saw Mayor Landrieu and both Bill Cassidy have these super PACs come out and supplement their campaigns. But right now we know that David Vitter is going to have a super PAC. He's emptying out his federal account into that super PAC right now. And I've heard rumors and suggestions that some of the other candidates may have see super PACs supporting their efforts as well.
And it seems like Bobby Jindal isn't any kind of a kingmaker in this situation.
No, it seems
given
right,
his status.
Right, everybody right now, it seems like all of the candidates at some point or another, maybe save Scott Angel, who worked closely with the governor, are running against him. You know, John Bell Edwards has nonstop has questioned his agenda. David Vitter in his announcement speech had made a kind of a sharp elbow at the governor, saying that if he gets elected to this, it'll be his last job. He won't run for anything else. So, you know, you almost have to find something to run against, and it seems like some of these candidates have chosen Bobby Jindal.
David Vitter is a curiosity in that, just from talking, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are excited about him personally, but he always gets big votes. He represents something to the people that's important.
Well, I think his base is energized for this race. I think there are a lot of people excited to see him on the ballot. Right now, I think if the race were held today, he would be a shoe-in for that runoff spot. The polls show him leading the race. The big questions are who's going to get in and maybe water down his vote and take him to task. Yeah, David Vitter is the favorite right now, and the way our open primary system is set up, you would have to assume that if the race stays like this, that John Bell Edwards is the only Democrat would get in. But you know, I would imagine there are Republican supporters out there trying to find a Democratic candidate to throw in that race, and we could very well end up with an all GOP runoff. And this is something we've seen before: Lieutenant Governor's race, Nungesser Darden, the special election in the 5th District with Reiser and McAllister. And this is interesting for Democrats, right? Because now the Democrats, their influence for governor is which Republican they back.
Do we know if many legislators are term limited this time around?
There is a large number of legislators. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I will tell you that it's the next term where we're going to see a large amount of institutional knowledge cycling off of the election. But a lot of these races are hot already, too. People are announcing for these seats. And there's a lot of musical chairs going on with House members who want to run for the Senate, and then, of course, members who are leaving.
So conceivably, because of term limitations, within the next 2 elections, we'll see maybe almost 100% turnover in the legislature.
It's going to be a large amount, especially after the following election after this year.
And some people say that weakens legislatures when the governor becomes that much more powerful than the legislature.
That and really the loss of institutional knowledge. Some folks argue, and then you have the other side of the coin that they want people want to get a fresh voice in there, and of course you can always just vote out the politicians you don't like, but the system isn't really set up for that to happen.
Well, Kathy, as you look into the new year in business, are you optimistic, and if so, why?
Oh, optimistic. Let's see. I guess so, in a lot of ways, because the economy has been good overall. The national economy and Louisiana's economy has been pretty good. So I think generally speaking, there's a lot of consumer optimism out there right now. I think one of the things that we have to be concerned about in Louisiana right now is oil prices. Jeremy referred to it. And we've seen, it's been rather dramatic. We've seen a 50% drop in oil prices over a period of just a few months. Spot prices per barrel, that is. And what that will do to Louisiana remains to be seen. Of course, for industries that are dependent on transportation, which is just about everybody you can think of, this is good news. I mean, retail, anybody who has shipping costs, this is good news because gasoline is so cheap all of a sudden, relatively speaking. But for the economy in Louisiana, of course, we're very dependent for jobs on various segments of the oil and gas industry. Here in Louisiana, in New Orleans and South Louisiana, it's largely a service industry economy. So it's all the companies that serve the offshore industry. Now, as far as the Gulf of Mexico offshore drilling and production is concerned, so far you're not seeing any particular impact from the oil prices, and really that's because they have such a long view. They're looking out, 3 to 5 to 7 years and projecting what prices are going to be at that time, by the time they're bringing this oil in where they're drilling. So the short-term movements in oil prices don't usually affect the offshore industry dramatically for a while. But I think if you see 3 to 6 more months of this, of prolonged low prices, you're going to see some kind of an impact. Jeremy mentioned that the Revenue Estimating Conference in Louisiana will be meeting soon, and they'll be setting a price of oil. One of the things they do is set a price that they're going to use for budgeting purposes for how much severance taxes, come into the state. So it will be interesting to see what number they settle on with that. But even so, it doesn't necessarily affect the offshore industry. What you are going to see probably is across the state, the shale industry, the shale drilling plays are already being affected in various ways. In Louisiana, much of the shale drilling is done for natural gas, and we've had prolonged periods of natural gas, very low gas prices for some time. But across the country, there are huge shale drilling plays, and it could very well be that Saudi Arabia, which is, they're the masterminds behind the oil price right now, that they're trying to send the U.S. a message. All they would really have to do is tighten up production in order to bring the prices up globally, and everybody would be, the industry worldwide would be in a little better shape. But they are deliberately holding back on that, which is unusual for Saudi Arabia. And I think some people think they're sending a message to the U.S. that, your production is getting too high. We're not going to just raise the price for your sake. So, it's an interesting new political situation, I think, because the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are sort of on a par now as far as production is concerned. But the ace in the hole for Saudi Arabia is they have vastly larger resources underground. Their reserves are they're massively larger than the U.S.
One of the big heralded stories over the past year, at least in New Orleans, was the return of Chiquita bananas. Is that just symbolically important, or is this the beginning of something big?
It's not as big as oil, for instance. But Chiquita banana, it is symbolic largely, but it's not unimportant to the Port of New Orleans, for instance. It means quite a few new additional containers coming into the port on an annual basis, and that's a good thing. It's good from the standpoint of just the image of having Chiquita come back into the city, and they're doing some special things with cargo facilities for them and ripening facilities for the bananas and that sort of thing. So it's good from that standpoint. And the port is doing very well. Cargo has been up anyway. So yeah, the bananas are a good sign for the Port of New Orleans, certainly. And I think eventually the opening of the wider Panama Canal is going to bring more cargo in. But I think it's still unclear just how much more that's going to mean to the Port of New Orleans. Some other things that I think that we clearly need to keep an eye on for the coming year is the opening of the new hospital. We have University Medical Center will be opening on that enormous tract in Mid-City in New Orleans. And even though the hospital opening itself probably won't mean a lot in terms of employment, because most of their staff is just going to transfer over from the interim hospital that's already operating. But as more pieces of that open, and then when the VA medical center opens in 2016, you're going to see massive impact there. You're already seeing it on property values and on new businesses opening around that site. It's going to happen rapidly once.
Just drive along Tulane Avenue, you can see it.
It's amazing, yeah.
I tell it to people, I'm surprised so many people haven't driven lately. If you haven't driven down Tulane, go. You'll be surprised
It is.
at what you see.
It's incredible.
Well, Ron, this week we're going to be celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans. You're a professor at Nunez College. You've written this book, The Battle of New Orleans, But for a Piece of Wood. I'll come back in a moment and ask you about what that means. But first, whenever people talk about the Battle of New Orleans, the first question that comes up is the fact that the war technically had ended, the Treaty of Ghent had been signed, so it was over. But at the same time, people says, yes, it was over, but still, it was good that the battle was fought. Why?
Well, really, it wasn't over. It was negotiated. The treaty was negotiated, and the people negotiating it had signed it, but it hadn't been signed by the King of England, hadn't been signed by the President, and hadn't been ratified by the Senate. So it was just a document out there. Within the document itself, it has that all property be returned to its rightful owner, which the Americans had no problem with, without realizing that from the British perspective, the rightful owner of Louisiana was Spain, because they've always viewed Louisiana as stolen property, because Napoleon promised them, I think it's Tuscany, in Italy for Louisiana, never gave it to them. Also in the treaty...
And there's still that argument out there that Louisiana really belongs to Spain.
Yeah, well, I mean, legitimately, by treaty, it did, and
Try to take it back.
now. Yeah. But the idea was Britain had intended. In fact, I think Ron Ness's book, he brings up that the Earl of Bathurst had sent a letter to Pakenham telling him, even if you hear about a treaty, don't worry about it, press for the advantage and take in New Orleans. That way they would occupy New Orleans, give it back to Spain. The purpose probably being that they were concerned because, as Napoleon said, that he was creating a rival for Great Britain by giving Louisiana to the United States. And as a result, if they could take Louisiana back, it would be an opportunity to kind of bridle in America and keep it from becoming too great. And the implications of the Battle of New Orleans are amazing. So you realize that the war was still going on. If we'd have lost Louisiana, just imagine the implications of that. Might not have had a civil war, right? Because it was about slavery in the territories. There wouldn't have been any territories. If we had to buy it back, we didn't have the money to buy it back. So the complications are just absolutely amazing.
So what does the subtitle mean, but
I
for a
don't
piece of
want to
wood?
ruin it for the readers, but basically let's just put it in a hint this way, that sometimes the greatest and largest events, little things can cause them to happen or to change opposite of what you expect. And but for a piece of wood is that reference that the British plan, Pakenham's plan on January the 8th was brilliant. It really was. And it would have worked except for some minor miscalculations, which had tremendous impact. And I wouldn't want to spoil it for the readers if you don't mind.
Okay.
But it's an amazing story. The British actually came incredibly close to winning it. And in fact, Jackson on the West Bank, Jackson was obviously thrilled at what had happened on the East Bank under his command. But when he saw that Colonel Thornton, William Thornton of the British, was taking the West Bank, he was terrified. He thought in fact, he contended that all was lost, because he realized that had he continued on his advance and taken Algiers Point, he'd launched Congreve rockets and shells into the city itself, and the city might have surrendered. And he was stuck out in Chalmette.
We've seen from time to time in American history a war launch a general's political career to become president. We certainly saw that with Dwight Eisenhower and Ulysses Grant and William Henry Harrison, on and on. But this was the same thing with Jackson. The Battle of New Orleans launched his career. Today, when people talk about Jackson, he seems to have sort of like a negative image because of the whole thing about the displacement of tribes. On the other hand, when you see studies, I'm talking about scholarly studies, talking about ranking American presidents, he always ranks pretty high.
Well, yes, I was fortunate to study under Joseph Tragle at UNO, and he was a Jacksonian historian. And Andrew Jackson basically carved out the new modern presidency. He was the first president to be properly elected through the convention process instead of caucuses. He was a very aggressive president in the sense that he didn't mind vetoing things. Prior to that, presidents only vetoed something if they felt there were constitutional issues. He vetoed something because he personally didn't like it. It was as simple as that. He challenged the Supreme Court. He was a true populist in many ways. He was the first one to spend, I think, over $1 million on a campaign. So that would be interesting. He actually campaigned. Most presidents before that time stayed secluded and other people worked for him.
It was seen as being improper to go out and campaign.
It was considered, right, improper, and as a result, most didn't. But he took the position that since he was this great hero from New Orleans, he was just going to visit people to just let them see him. The fact that it played to his political advantage was totally secondary.
And there's a big reenactment of the battle coming
Yes,
up.
there is. You know, Tim Pickles has about between 12 and 1,400 reenactors coming in. This will be one of the biggest celebrations we'll have. They'll also have operations going on over at the battlefield itself. At Nunez College, we're having a symposium on the 9th and 10th with a collection of historians coming together to talk about different aspects of the thing. So it's 200th anniversary, and this is, I think, one of the greatest misunderstood battles. I rank it with Yorktown as far as the importance or the impact of the United States.
We want to mention that WYES will be having a special about the battle this coming Wednesday. And so look forward. We'll remind you again a little bit later. But speaking of battles, let's go to Jeff Duncan. Jeff, during the Saints season, which started off bad, but there was always reason for optimism. It's always, well, we started off bad, but this can be fixed. Things are going to turn around. Even into that second to last game against Atlanta, there was still hope. Look, we can win this, get to the playoffs will turn around. And it never really happened.
Well, I think that optimism was rooted in the fact that they were in the worst division in the NFL that kept giving them hope. Otherwise, I think we might have seen a greater sense of urgency out of Sean Payton and the entire organization. I think this whole season snuck up on everybody out on Airline Drive. I think they were guilty of a little overconfidence. We in the media bought into it, and I think to some extent the players bought into it. And it was a wake-up call, and we saw it late in the season when Sean Payton benched some players on the roster. We've seen it today with him making coaching changes on the staff. And I don't think he's done there, by the way. I think there's going to be more shake-up within the organization. I think to some degree, maybe this was the organization falling into a sense of complacency. They'd won the Super Bowl in 2009, had a bit of a honeymoon period, and then coming off that bounty season last year when the team won under Sean Payton with him back on the sidelines, it felt like everybody was on cruise control. They could just press a button, Sean Payton's back in control, and we're back to winning 10, 11 games a year. I think that's the mentality they came into this season with, and it fell apart on them pretty quickly. And I think the roster now, we look at this team, has a lot of work to be done, and there's not a lot of assets available. It's really going to challenge Mickey Loomis, the general manager, Kai Harley, the contract negotiator, and Sean Payton. That front office, that brain trust, is really going to have to get creative and I think very aggressive to resurrect this program, because I see it as a crossroads right now. They could go one of two ways. And knowing how competitive Sean Payton is, he's not going to sit by idly. But they've got a lot of work to do because the business model of the NFL is structured to allow the weak to rise to the top. And right now the Saints are kind of caught in the middle of an aging roster with salary cap problems. So I don't have a really rosy picture to paint for you right now.
Like that's what happened with Darren Sproles last year. A lot of people were critical of the Saints letting him go, but it was really a salary cap issue.
Yeah, and there was a lot of decisions that were made in addition to that. I mean, the team went out and signed Jarvis Byrd and gave him one of the largest contracts in the NFL for a safety. They operated like a team that was ready to challenge for a Super Bowl this past year. The decisions they made were, we're all in. We've got this 35-year-old quarterback who's still a Hall of Fame type talent, and the window is closing, so we're going to try and win another Super Bowl while we can. And it all kind of fell apart. The dominoes that happened after the Champ Bailey decision, which I think was a huge one. They gambled on him having another year left, and he didn't even make the team. And a lot of decisions were based on that, including the draft. And this team wasn't as talented, nearly as talented as we all thought they were. And I'm kicking myself because I picked the Saints to go to the Super Bowl this year. I look like an idiot. And it wouldn't be the first time or the last. But nevertheless, I should have seen it coming, and you could see it immediately once they started playing games. They were not more talented than the teams they were playing. Now, they could have eked out a playoff berth this year. They were competitive enough. But you could see the days of of them scoring 50 points and 40 points and winning by 3 touchdowns in the Superdome and setting offensive records, those days I think are gone for a while. And I'm not sure we'll get them back. I think the further we get from those days, the more special those Saints teams become, because we're seeing just it's not as easy as they made it look back then.
Is Drew Brees still viable?
I think so. I mean, clearly he's plateauing, I think, which is natural. He's going to be 36 here in a few weeks, and he needs help around him. And I think it's clear when he has a great offensive line like he had when the team won the Super Bowl, that covers up for a lot of mistakes. He was under a lot more pressure this year, and I guarantee you that's something they're going to take care of in this offseason. They got old fairly quick on the offensive line and create a lot of pressure for him.
Who's going to be the defensive coordinator next year?
I think Rob Ryan will be back. I'll be surprised if he's not. I don't think it's a sure thing, but I think that they realized that he was trying to piece things together there on that side of the ball, and the personnel was not as good as they thought. And they had, frankly, had some young players that they were counting on that did not come through this year. A lot of those guys on the defensive line, I think we just assumed would be taking another step forward, and they didn't. And they messed up the secondary, like we said. So I think he's going to get another shot, but he's got to produce next year, or Sean Payton will not be patient.
Okay, we want to look ahead at things coming up. And Ron, we want to mention again that the documentary that comes up this Wednesday.
Yes, Marcy Cavanaugh has put together a splendid documentary on the Battle of New Orleans. I believe it's about an hour long, so it'll be coming up this Wednesday. So I urge all viewers to please take a look at this. This is historic.
There it is, this Wednesday on Channel 12. So, and it's at 8 p.m. Jeremy?
Oil prices, how much is going to hit the state? The forecast is in the low 80s right now. Prices are actually in the mid 50s. So we're looking at a bigger budget hole for next year, and maybe even more cuts during the current fiscal year. We lose $12 million for every $1 drop in the annual price of oil.
Wow. Kathy?
Along the same line as oil, BP is going to be back in court this month for the third and final time, probably, in the ongoing trial over the oil spill in 2010. So this is phase 3. This is what they call, Judge Carl Barbier calls the penalty phase of this trial. He has already determined that BP was grossly negligent in connection with the spill, and this round will determine just how much they will have to pay. It could go as high as $18 billion now that he has determined they were grossly negligent. We'll see.
Jeff?
Well, Eric Gordon, Pelicans guard, who's been on the shelf for a few weeks with a torn labrum injury, returns to practice Friday. He's going to practice for the first time and should be back on the court Monday night when the Pelicans play the Washington Wizards. So it'll be the first time he's played in a while. They need him back if they're going to try and make this playoff push.
Okay. And Ron, real quick, on the way out, how important was Jean Lafitte at the Battle of New Orleans?
I think it was very important because the British were trying to come in through the bayous, and he alerted Claiborne and Jackson to what their plan was to come through waterways. There's some other stories involving him, though, that would be interesting because we don't really have a lot of records on the man. I've always wondered why Bayou Bienvenue was left open.
Okay. But the point is, whenever you're in doubt, turn to a pirate.
Or a privateer.
Or a privateer, there he is. Thank you all. It's a good show. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.